So what would you say to somebody that's out there wearing red just because somebody else can? And I think my comment was they're going to be guilty of impersonating an Amish man.
Yeah, right.
Right?
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. If there is such thing as fake news, then this is the opposite. The real story behind the scenes about outdoor fun and adventure with a healthy dose of information about our outdoor economy in Maine, all through the eyes of the Mainers who are actually doing it. That's what this show is. But today's show takes the cake. The Maine legislature is just about done for the year, and today is about some of the quirkier issues that came before the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee, a committee I chair in the legislature. Some of the bills before the committee were about who gets to serve bear meat at a public event, who can swap moose hunting permits, whether to make it legal to go spearfishing for northern pike in Sebago Lake. And we'll be starting off with Hunter Safety Red for Amish people, which is now legal if required by your religion. We'll start with that. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Dave McRae, you're a legislator from Fort Fairfield.
Yes, I am.
Well, and this is your first term.
This is my first term.
Okay, so one of your very first experiences was this bill, which would allow hunter safety red for the Amish.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, the reason for the show today is we had a bunch of quirky bills. This was certainly one of them. And the public, when they see these quirky bills come out of the legislature, say often, why are you wasting your time on this stuff when we have serious matters? Yeah. Once you dig into this, it turns out there really is some underlying principles or problems that you need to get at, and that's what the legislature does. So describe the situation.
Well, back, shortly after I got elected, I have some constituents that don't vote, by the way, up in the county, in the Fort Fairfield Easton area, the Amish. And I'd like to preface this by stating that they're kind of a fundamentalist group. I mean, there are certain faith groups out there that have various groups of them, like different types of Baptists, what have you. And these are a more fundamentalist group of Amish people. And they simply do not want to draw attention to the individual. That's very, very strong. They don't like red. They don't like bright colors. They don't like mirrors. They don't like lights. They don't want to put, in my opinion, enough warning on their buggies when they are traveling in the day or especially at night. Now, that leads us to the question, okay? So they do like to hunt, of course. They live off the land. They live in the land, on the land, off the land. And they contacted me, some of them that I know, and the leader, Mr. Noah Yoder, and asked if I would mind considering putting in a bill for them having to do with replacing, for their purposes, based on religious beliefs, allowing them to wear red in lieu of hunter orange. Well, I thought that was quite intriguing. And I know for a fact, because I used to be on the town council up until this last December in Fort Fairfield, that they don't like red. They really don't like red on their buggies. They don't like red on anything. It is a very unpopular color for them. But if I thought red was unpopular,
they really hate
orange is just over the top. And if you think about that, the science behind it, hunter orange is brighter. It's easier to see than red. It's just a physiological fact of human eyesight. So their distaste for it is is backed up by science. So anyway, the more I talked with Mr. Yoder, the more I became intrigued with it and thought this is something that I could get behind. And it was for all the good reasons. It was something that I firmly believe in, do believe, and will continue to believe is something that really just is the right thing to do. It isn't a politically popular thing. It won't do me a bit of good, other than the fact that I would hope that people would realize that I'm standing up for something that I really believe in. And we base this country on religious freedom. And if that's the case, then we ought to practice it. So here we are.
Yep. Now, this divides basically into two principles. On the one side, we have a very safe hunting system these days. The number of accidental shootings has gone down to about close to zero as we're ever going to get it. Part of that is the hunter safety orange and better training in the woods, better target identification. We're getting better at that. But the hunter safety orange was always a big part of that. So on the one hand, you want that safety in the woods. On the other hand, you do have a group of people who have a specific religious need to not call attention to themselves. They were willing to compromise to back off from orange and go with another color they distaste, that they find distasteful but not as bad as the first. They feel prohibited from orange. They can barely tolerate red, but they'll do it. So that was our dividing line.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, Bob, they were hunting, and they were hunting using as bright a red as you've ever seen in your life. It was not orange. They would not wear orange. In fact, their belief in this is so strong. I mean, this is a national. Their group of fundamentalist Amish extends over a large part of the country, actually, and they believe this so strongly that if they get arrested, if they get a court summons for wearing red in lieu of orange, they absolutely will not pay it. As an individual, they would be drummed out of their religious faith group by wearing hunter orange, and they definitely would be sort of driven out, if you will, if they wear hunter, if they pay the fine for getting the summons. So you take a look at the Religious Freedom Act of 1993, federal. Okay, and they were on a collision course, and just now, even if most of the wardens were saying, I bet they're Amish, I think I'm not going to give them a ticket. Sooner or later, somebody was going to get a ticket, especially if somebody in the non-Amish community saw the warden questioning an Amish person out there wearing red, and the guy or gal that sees it is wearing orange, and they're saying, "Hey, what's going on here?"
So ultimately, this was a court case waiting to happen. It
was just absolutely, and I really believe that it would have. I know these people are very serious about what they say, and I don't believe for a minute there was a bluff here.
No, it does. In fact, they came into the committee, and I think the entire committee liked them right away. I mean, there's a good, hard-working, honest, God-fearing people. Yeah, you got to like that.
Well, I'll tell you, the thing that I found funny is that they had the hearing that we had that I had invited three of them down to, including Mr. Yoder, who is sort of the group leader. That was on a Thursday. And that was the day of the last big snowstorm, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So they traveled down here by Sear Bus Line. I mean, they don't have motor vehicles, and they sure can't take their horse buggies 245 miles. So they were planning on coming down on the bus. Well, the bus didn't run the day before. So they had to get down here, and they got down here by bartering some firewood to have a guy drive them down here. So, I mean, it just kind of speaks to the charm of the charm of the bill, it just was a fun bill to work on.
And it was their commitments to their beliefs, too.
Absolutely.
Now, this particular sect of Amish, there are many different persuasions of the Amish faith.
There are.
And this is one particular group that does skew these really bright colors. Not all Amish do.
Correct.
But some in other states do, and at least one other state had already beaten us to the punch. They already authorized this.
Yes. Minnesota, in fact, I still have the book that this group gave me so that I would know that I was on pretty solid grounds as far as not breaking brand new ground. Minnesota has this very same law now. We are in line with Minnesota. I've heard some people say that there's another state or two. I'm not aware of it, okay? But I know for a fact, because I have the law book from Minnesota, and it's right there. So that's in there. I know that, like in Pennsylvania, that's kind of where most people in the Northeast look to say, that's where all the Amish live. Well, that's not true. There's a lot in New York, Ohio. In northern Maine now, there are probably 30 or 40 families at least. But the ones in Pennsylvania, very, very, they've done very well. Financially, extremely well. They are very, very successful farming families. And
hard work is rewarded sometimes.
They're working 14 hours a day in the middle of the winter. So I think that to say, I saw Amish people wearing orange or whatever, there are some groups that have joined the modern world more than this particular group.
Some groups right in Maine and Appleton area, I believe there are some.
I know of some that have cell phones. These guys don't have motor vehicles, cell phones, or anything else. Not to say that they wouldn't use mine. But okay.
You're listening to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and today's show reviews some of the quirky bills that came before the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee in this year's Maine legislature, including allowing the Amish to wear red instead of blaze orange. One question, blaze orange is defined in state law as a particular standard, but what about this bill? What color red is red enough? Well, hold that thought. We'll be back in a moment. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Today's show is mostly for fun. There are some quirky bills in the legislature having to do with hunting and fishing. As usual, some of the bills make you wonder, why is the legislature dealing with a silly issue like that? It turns out even the quirkiest bills have a rational explanation behind most of them. Right now, we're talking about letting the Amish wear red while hunting for religious reasons. Their beliefs don't allow them to wear colors bright enough to call attention to themselves. They can barely tolerate red, and they are prohibited from wearing orange. But that's the next question. How red is red enough? Representative Dave McRae of Fort Fairfield is with me. He brought in samples of what the Amish are willing to wear, and it was as red as a mountie uniform.
Yes, yeah, I came and I guess we're not really supposed to use props in our testimony.
Not on the floor of the House.
And not on the floor of the House. And this was in committee, and I brought the red vest.
Yes, props are fine in committee.
Yeah, and there was a little question as to what frequency of the red was going to be and stuff like that. I think the thing the two or three things that really helped this bill get traction was that the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife testified in support of it, which surprised some people on the committee, actually, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I was very pleased. The other thing that happened once it got to the floor of the House is that it became kind of nonpartisan when the Christian Civic League of Maine jumped in behind it and said, this, thank you for doing this. This is the right thing to do. It does promote or at least support religious freedom. So I don't know what the vote finally was. But it was like 138-6 or what have you. The Senate, they weren't going to mess with it either. And last Friday, the governor signed it into law. So that's my big law.
Yeah, I think the bottom line in all this is that there are certain things that religions can't do. You can't have multiple wives. We're not going to let you marry children. Religion doesn't get you a free pass to do things that are not acceptable to our society. That's always going to be true. In this case, it was a judgment call, I think. As much as possible, we do respect religions and a variety of religions in this country, and to the extent we can, I think policy will try to accommodate their particular needs. That seemed to be where the entire legislature fell on this one.
I think so, right from the committee to the House to the Senate and on to the governor. I remember I think it was probably the hearing, and it might have been you that asked me in the committee, so what would you say to somebody that's out there wearing red just because somebody else can? And I think my comment was they're going to be guilty of impersonating an Amish man.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's all good. I did go to see Mr. Yoder this last Saturday for about 10 minutes. And I'll tell you, it was kind of enjoyable to watch that. He's not a very big guy, but watching an Amish man in his Amish hat doing a jig was he was a happy guy.
Yeah.
So it was a good thing. It left a good feeling in everybody's mind.
Yeah, I think once you get to the question is, okay, if we just put it on the books that for religious reasons you can wear red, anybody can make that claim. But then you take that the next step forward, and when it's already proven that orange is your safest color, what idiot, without religious reasons, goes into the woods wearing a color that's not as protective as it could be?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
The fear that all of a sudden all kinds of hunters are going to go into the woods wearing red never really seemed to make sense to anybody.
Well, what's interesting is I thought of this after the fact, and before the governor signed it, but in the last couple of 3 weeks. I hunt in the very region where there are a higher population and density of Amish people than almost anywhere else. And to be honest with you, and I'm out there quite a bit. I just retired teaching last June, and so I'm out there quite a bit in the fall, traipsing around on some of their land, I might add. And I have yet to see an Amish person in the woods. So I mean, it's
they're always working too hard.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, but occasionally they do get a little bit of time and stuff like that, or they may carry a gun while they're working in the woods. I don't know. Yeah. But to think that, behind every tree there's going to be an Amish man that's not as protected as he might be, it just isn't going to be the case. The density there, the population density of the Amish people, it's not that great. There might be in all of my whole region. I mean, they have pretty good-sized families, but there might be 200 or 300 individuals, half of which are female, probably not hunting at all, and another third would be under the age of 6.
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
Yep. So what it came down to is the legislature made a judgment call that we could probably carve out this little piece for a bunch of respectable people who have clear religious reasons for their preference. On this case, we can make an exception. On other cases, maybe not. It's a case-by-case basis, but let them go.
Well, yeah, and just being a freshman legislator, and I've been saying right along, I'm the oldest freshman you ever saw. But anyway, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. But what I really do see is that the legislature is responsive. Maybe more responsive than responsible, but responsive.
I'll grant you that last one.
Okay, maybe responsive to small issues that are important. We see these little carve-outs in a lot of areas. It might be a dam one place. It might be a border between two towns. In another case, it might be school jurisdiction in another. And so it's not all just great big broad legislation. Lots of times it gets right down to small needs.
Well, the legislature has these big jobs to do, and it does them. Or it's supposed to do them.
Right.
But once you establish the policy, then you have a lot of nuanced issues that may come up where you have to interpret that policy for special situations.
Exactly.
So, we have our hunter safety education. We have hunter safety orange. Now, once you have that policy in place, are there any reasonable exceptions that might appeal to people on a common sense basis? And then we wrestle with that. It looks like a small bill. We actually did the big one. Now we're just doing the little pieces that straighten it out.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we did have to wrestle with a little bit is when you're Amish and wearing red, it may not be as safe, but you're taking that risk on yourself, and we decided that if you're willing to take that risk, that's acceptable. There is this infinitesimal possibility that somebody's going to mistake you in the woods, and they're going to have to live with that the rest of their lives. So we did wrestle with that, and people will ask, did you think of that? The fact is, we did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I and then again, I emphasize it should look like a deer before you go.
That's what we came down on.
Right.
One of the reasons that we have a safe hunting record these days is because we have much more than we ever used to decades ago. You've got to positively identify your target.
One thing that I ran into is a little bit of pushback on because we have moved to hunter orange. I mean, back when I was a kid, it was red. Everybody wore red.
Yeah.
Okay.
Red plaid.
Or not even as visible as this red that they're using now. But and they credited the considerable decrease in hunter fatalities with that. And I think it would be logical to think that it's probably more hunter safety. Maybe a bit fewer hunters also. So I think, just like motor vehicle deaths, because of a lot of reasons, are cut in half from what they were 50 years ago, or 30 years ago anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, you can always assign responsibility for increased fatalities or decreased fatalities in traffic accidents to better equipment, but it's also maybe better training.
Well, being a driver education teacher as a part-time guy in my teaching career, I'd go for that.
Yeah, I pitched you that softball, didn't I?
Yeah, and thank you.
Well, congratulations on getting that bill passed. I mean, people are going to look at that and say, why aren't you focusing on the big stuff, Maine legislature? But there's always little stuff that has to be dealt with because we got to do it all.
That's true. And this didn't take a lot of legislative time except on my part.
No, it really didn't. I mean, we weighed the issues, and there's the result.
Did a good job. Yep. Well, I'm very pleased with the results all the way around. Should be a feel-good thing for everybody.
That is Representative Dave McCrae of Fort Fairfield. And we've been talking about one of the more quirky bills related to hunting and fishing that was entertained by the Maine legislature this session, allowing the Amish to wear red instead of orange while hunting for religious reasons. Next situation, under current law, if you eat a moose burger at a wild game dinner in Maine, you might be breaking the law. I'll tell you how to stay legal when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. There are some weird bills in the legislature every year, and some of them have to do with hunting and fishing. Later in the show, we'll get the legality of swapping moose permits and spearfishing northern pike. But right now, it's time to tackle a critically important topic. Are game dinners legal? Well, they better be. There are some popular game dinners across the state, from small church suppers to larger fishing game club dinners to a big one at Unity College. But since state law prohibits the selling of game meat, how exactly are they legal? That led to a bill put in by an old friend of today's program, the state senator from Wilton. Tom Saviello, weren't you just on this show?
Yeah, I was. We were on that porch. Now we're sitting by the lake.
Today's show is all about some of the quirkier bills that were in front of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
Oh, stop it.
Well, this was. Come on.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. The underlying principle behind it took a while to sort out.
It really did. I mean,
Well, let's back up. What was this bill about?
Was if someone wants to have a fundraiser and they're fortunate enough to have a hunter that's part of the organization, he could donate his deer steaks, his deer hamburger, his bear meat, or whatever to that fundraiser, and then they could sell tickets to the fundraiser but not charge for the meat. And it just seemed to me like a wink and a nod. We're not going to enforce this from the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. As long as you do that and you don't pay for the meat, that made me really uncomfortable. And it made and this really, a lot of people say this is another George Smith bill. George brought it to us. Well, I actually had this happen up in Phillips. We were having a fundraiser for the Fly Rod Crosby Trail, the first Maine guide in the state of Maine in the late 1800s. Great writer about this outdoors. We wanted to celebrate that. So I said, why don't we do a game dinner? Well, guys got enough deer meat out there. We can bring it on in and charge $10 for the hamburger, and it all goes into the pot. So I called Fish and Game, and I said, well, you're not supposed to do that, but if you only, the wink and the nod, as I wink at Bob, is if you charge $10 for the French fry you sell, and you can give them the deer steak, well, it really bugged me. So when I was asked to put the bill in, I said, no, that makes sense with what I've done. So that's what it really was about, to try to put into statute what was being practiced.
Yeah. In fact, we mentioned George Smith. George has been on the show before, and he was a longtime director of SAM's Sportsman Alliance of Maine. So George had an interest for this exact same reason. It just looks like, why don't you call it what it looks like? You're charging for the meat.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And then for reasons we'll get to in a moment, this bill went on a wild ride.
It went for a wild ride. Wild.
It left the committee, the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee, with, I think, 10-2 report.
Well, even go back to that. You guys almost had it, and then somebody said, nah, let's not do this. You ought not to pass. It was going to die. So somebody made the motion to table.
Yep.
And somebody ignored that motion, which was a typical procedural
right,
thing.
Yeah.
So then you finally sent it out.
Then it comes back, and we finally sent it out not to pass. But then it gets revised in the Senate because of you.
Well, I'm just a good orator. I'm a great debater. I got up there, told the story, and the next thing I know is I turned a whole bunch of votes my way.
Well, you also revised the bill, and you made it about civic and charitable organizations.
Right.
Because there are people we would like to see do game dinners. We actually like game dinners in the state. It's an opportunity for the public to sample things they wouldn't otherwise get. So we like them. So it comes back to the House. We once again, by only 2 votes, say
and
not
that
to
is
pass.
very important, because if it had been crushed in the House, I would not have proceeded. But it was 2. I was surprised. I looked it up. It's 2. Wow, somebody was on my side.
I think you were surprised. I'm chair of the committee.
At least you held it.
There's a whole bunch of guys who flipped their votes.
So surprised. And so I asked for what we call a committee of conference.
Right.
Which means that people that voted on the prevailing side in the House, which were against the bill, and people that voted on the prevailing side in the Senate who voted for the bill, got together 3 and 3 to talk about what we could do, if anything, to come to some kind of resolution.
So we again rewrite the bill in the conference committee.
We could.
We could.
But we didn't.
But ultimately we did not. And I guess we can now get into the fundamental underlying principles on why we all agreed finally that this need not pass. There was a better way forward. The principle is it's already in law that you cannot sell game meat, big game. That's bear, moose, deer, and turkey. You can't sell it. But if it's donated and it's to an event of any kind, could be a cooking demonstration, so long as the meat is not sold to whoever is preparing it for the public, and so long as fees are charged for the event, not for the meat, you're actually complying with the law.
And that's really important, because nowhere was my intent to try to charge for the meat. I just want to recognize that's what's really been done for, because our game out there is a very valuable commodity. And unfortunately, there are those individuals who could take advantage of this by poaching a deer and then coming up with a false Bob's deer meat fundraiser and selling himself the meat by basically whatever he has an income. That never was the intent. But we had to get that sorted out.
Exactly. I mean, I think when we dug down deep enough, you realize the real issue was the public just didn't know how these are supposed to work.
That's correct. And the messages were mixed. You know, depending on who the game warden was, or depending on who you got at Fish and Wildlife, you might get a whole different message that was out there. And then my other concern, as you and I and your email really hit it on the head, being someone who was around with LD1 and who's lived with quote-unquote guidelines.
Yes.
Guidelines are only as good as this administration. You know, the next administration comes in and somebody can totally interpret that we can't do that. You know, that's not allowed. So we needed something out there, to me, that was concrete, that was consistent, that we all had in our hands, and the public could well know about it when they called in.
Yeah, and especially if they call in, no matter who's at the desk, can give them the exact consistent information, or which warden you run into. So I think everyone agreed, including the department agreed, that they had to clarify this so that everybody understand what the rules are if you want to do it.
And I want to thank, Commissioner Woodcock immediately called me. He and I, as you know, personal friends. I'm his senator. And we had a good conversation about it. And he was kind of ambivalent if we put it into law or not. He said, I got some guys in my group that said, yeah, do it. I got guys that don't want to do it. And then where they got down to it is that I think Joel Wilkerson was very uncomfortable with putting it into statute. And I said, well, just give me a concrete. Normally, we write the letter and say, do this.
Yeah, let's back up. Joel Wilkinson is who?
He's the head of the game wardens.
Right.
Great guy. Great guy.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. All our game wardens are great guys. I mean, they're out there protecting our assets that are so valuable to the state. But that's another day for a talk on in the canoe that time.
Yeah.
But he came back, and so I said, rather than we write you a letter saying do this, can you write back to us what the procedure is going to be? And Chan says, I think we can do that. So he and Tim Peabody, who I believe is the assistant commissioner.
He's the deputy commissioner, and he used to be
the head of the game warden service.
So he knows this stuff cold.
And they sat down and they wrote us a memorandum that basically outlined three things. I can remember: one, you can't sell the meat. Two, it's got to be for a charitable. No, it doesn't even for charitable.
It doesn't have to be charitable. It has to be legally obtained or harvested. Legally killed, I guess.
And what was the third one? Do you remember?
You have to charge for the event, not for the meat. Right.
So. It's in writing. It's perfect. And so now the individual that sits at the desk, if you called down there and said, I'm doing a fundraiser for Bob because I want to buy him a new radio, and you have somebody that wants to donate that, they'll give you that exact copy of that memo. That guideline is in hard copy, so it will be consistently applied. And if somebody comes along later that decides to try to enforce against you and you've followed those rules, they won't be able to do so.
Yeah. One of the rabbit holes we went down as we were working on the bill in committee was, well, there are a lot of groups we would like to see be able to do this. So we started to define, charitable and civic groups, churches. We want to authorize them to be able to charge for game meat. Slowly but surely we realized, if you actually define who can do it, you're also defining who can't. And so there may be Masons, Shriners, other fraternal organizations. It may be cooking demonstrations at a reenactment show. It could be any number of things that currently are legally able to do it that would be accidentally excluding. The law of unintended consequences, we pass a lot.
Yeah, no, and that was not the intent. So I think we came up with an eloquent solution.
Yep.
We do good work at that.
Well, and the best thing is we didn't pass a law. And I love not passing laws. we have enough.
We did, and it's, you're right. It goes back to the basic premise of the law. You cannot sell our game meat.
That's right.
So all we did is we built off of that a memorandum of understanding, basically, of what you can do with that deer meat. So.
Yep. So we ended up in a good place, and congratulations, that was your bill. And that masterful big game hunter is Senator Tom Saviello of Wilton. To sum up, wild game dinners are legal if the game is lawfully killed, donated to the dinner, cooked and consumed during the event, and fees are charged for the event, not the game. That's actually the way it's always been, but now this should be clear to everyone. Up next, somebody wanted to make it easier for moose hunters to swap their permits. Instead, they got exactly the opposite of what they wanted. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket, with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. It happens every year. You look at the bills sponsored in the legislature and wonder how some of that crazy stuff gets on the calendar. Often there's a backstory to the proposed legislation. For instance, Representative Danny Martin had a bill in to make it legal to swap moose hunting permits. And you're thinking, what's wrong with swapping permits? It doesn't harm the resource, and who cares what fellow hunters do if they both have been lucky enough to win a permit in the moose lottery? But that's the problem. Everyone knows you won a permit. It's a public record, which means that some people know you have something that might be valuable to somebody else. I've got the sponsor right here. I caught up with him right here on the balcony of the State House. We're outside, near the traffic on State Street, surrounded by other legislators, wondering what the heck we're doing. So, Danny Martin, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. You are from Sinclair, and you represent the northern part of Aroostook County.
I do. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, so we had this one bill that you sponsored that looked simple enough and then got complicated fast. So let's go over it. But basically, this was a bill to allow moose permit winners in the moose lottery to swap their permits.
Well, that's correct. I believe we're talking about LD 630 that I sponsored on behalf of a constituent from the Eagle Lake area. And as I understand it, that came out of your committee, Bob, with a divided report after many renditions. It's currently, as you know, it's currently in the Senate. I believe it's on the Senate table, and I'm not sure what the status or what's going to occur with this piece of legislation. But it does, as I understand it, as amended, it just simply allows electronic transfers, online transfers.
That was the original idea. And you were the commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, so some of these issues strike kind of close to home for you.
They do. When I served as commissioner under Governor Baldacci's administration from 2003 to 2011, and at the time, transfers of moose permits was allowed, but for some reason the current administration did away with that. But it's great, and as you know, I served with you in the last 127th legislature on your committee, and I no longer serve there. But it's interesting serving on both sides of the horseshoe as a member of the legislature, and later on as a member of the executive, and then a couple of years later back on that committee. It was a fun committee.
Oh yeah, very fun and chaotic. I love that part about the committee, but. I guess the issue originally was you could the law was silent in this. Not all moose permits are created equal. Some permits are in zones that have a lot more moose. Some permits allow you to take males only, some females only. So no two permits are necessarily alike when you win one in the lottery. It used to be you could just swap them. If you could make a deal with a friend who also has a permit, maybe you equalize the difference between the quality of those permits by throwing in a few lobsters. You could do that.
Yeah, it used to be, and that was for the convenience of folks that were successful receiving a tuck. You know, if you're from northern Aroostook County, and you get a permit down south, and you have a friend or somebody that's an acquaintance or somebody that's contacted you to transfer your permit, and he or she is from southern Maine, that seemed the right thing to do.
Yeah, and nobody ever cared.
Nobody ever cared.
And then brokers got into it, and it was a matter of guides could boost their service, or camp owners, sporting camp owners might be able to get more clients if they could be a go-between, find those people and connect them up, and maybe then recruit them as customers once the swap has happened. So all the permit winners are on the public record. You can look them up, find their addresses, all the winners. So they were. The complaint was a lot of moose permit winners were starting to get a lot of solicitations trying to broker these deals, and the legislature reacted last session by saying, "Okay, forget it. We're just not going to allow swapping anymore."
Well, there were a lot of funds and monies involved, and as you well know, we the department now. Literally sells. I'm not sure it was 10 when I was there, but I'm not sure what the number is. But a lot of folks from out of state will pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for the opportunity to harvest a moose, as you well know.
Well, we have basically a moose that's in very limited supply, so the commercial value is very high, and we have this long-standing tradition in this state, brought on by abuses a century ago, where we do not commercialize our game.
Yeah.
So when the brokering started, it really crept up to the line of, okay, people are making money off this game situation. It may not be a direct sale of the meat, but now there's really profiteering going on.
And I agree, and which is why I didn't oppose the bill as it came out of your committee, because that was a concern by a lot of committee members, and I shared some of those concerns. As you well know, our our population, our moose population in Maine is decreasing somewhat. We have the same situation that concerns the moose population in New Hampshire with winter ticks, and that, in my opinion, is taking its toll. And thank God that the department is moving in the right direction, and hopefully we can overcome the situation.
Yeah, the department's really doing some extraordinary research. I mean, it leads the nation in what we're able to do.
They are.
I think when the legislature said to the last session, here's how we're going to fix it, we're just going to ban swapping. We'll even put a Class D misdemeanor fine on it, which is a huge penalty. But it didn't stop the brokering. So it was no longer legal to swap. But if somebody tried to arrange it, that wasn't actually included in that law. And it was the brokering that had caused the problem in the first place. So the committee suddenly got tangled up.
Yeah, no, you're right. And in my opinion, and with all due respect to the department, I have a lot of respect for the department and Commissioner Woodcock, they might have overreacted somewhat, which is why I agreed to sponsor LD 630.
Yep. So the committee ended up sort of revising things. Brokering was now made illegal. So I think the original intent of the bill was to set up a brokering system through the department. By the time it came out of committee, the committee said, no, on a 12-to-1 report, as I recall, we're not going to have brokering. You can't do it. And so this is one of those quirky bills where the result is exactly the opposite of what the original proponents wanted.
Exactly. And like I said, I think compromise is always a good thing as long as people keep talking. And hopefully LD 630 will come out of the Senate and in some form or fashion get enacted by this legislature.
Yeah, and at some point we may decide we overreacted again.
We'll see.
Yeah.
There's always 129th legislature.
Exactly. And that's the way the legislature actually works.
Correct.
We don't get everything perfect the first time. And
correct.
Or even sometimes the second.
Right.
Danny Martin is a current legislator and former IF&W commissioner. The legality of swapping moose permits was one of the more quirky bills involving outdoor sports this year, but it certainly wasn't the quirkiest. Coming up, would you believe there's a section of the state as big as Delaware where you can't train your bear hunting dogs? And then how about if we took care of one invasive species problem by spearfishing northern pike? You're listening to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio, 92.9 The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Today's show is about some of the strangest bills to come in front of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee recently. One of them would allow spearfishing for northern pike in Sebago Lake. Representative Lester Ordway is from Standish, and a large section of the district is on his lake. I've caught up with him in the back row of the House chamber of the legislature. So, Lester, what was your idea about spearfishing?
Spearfishing was to just eliminate pike any way it could. My idea was that it would be skin divers, scuba divers, a la when we were kids, we saw Mike Nelson on
Yeah.
That
Lloyd Bridges.
Lloyd Bridges.
Shows how old we are.
That's right. So that was my idea, and it got turned around to actually people throwing a spear.
When I first saw this bill come in, I thought that's exactly what you were talking about. You'd be able to go down and spear one when you saw it.
They do that out in Minnesota and out that area of the country. They do spearfish like that, but that wasn't my intent. But unfortunately, my bill didn't go anywhere.
Well, when we finally got into the discussion in committee, we actually did, I guess, discuss what everybody thought we were going to follow, and that's what other states did.
Right.
And there's apparently, where these things are native and where they're a big game fish and part of the sport fishing industry, it is typical to make a big hole in the ice. You enough lighting to see what you're spearing, right. Drop down some bait, and then when a pike comes up, you spear it.
Yeah, they actually do that with decoys. They decoy.
Decoy, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the bill I think we thought we were asked to pass.
And so, I kind of got blown out of the water, so to speak, on my spearfishing bill.
Yeah. Other states do it. Do you remember how many states were allowing?
I don't. I brought to the committee the fact that Vermont allows you to shoot them with a rifle. They actually shoot pike and suckers in Vermont, the only state that they stand on the bank and shoot them with the hunting rifle.
That sounds appealing to me somehow. I remember when we worked this bill, there were a number of issues brought up by the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Department, some of which was if you adopted those methods they use in the Midwest, where you cut a big hole in the ice and you spear them when they come up, it wasn't really going to have much effect on the population. It really wouldn't save the salmon.
Right.
Furthermore, you might have a little bit of difficulty with a fish at depth, knowing that you're killing the right target.
Correct.
Not every big fish coming to the top is a pike.
I couldn't disagree that much with the biologist. I mean, that's his job, and I just you know, I can rebuild an automatic transmission, but you know, I'm not a biologist.
Yeah.
So you know, I had the idea. I brought it forward. Actually, I talked to a couple of people that scuba dive for sport, and they were excited about it. So that was my intent.
Yeah. I don't know at what depth or under what conditions these pike live. I don't know it's a place you could even scuba dive to get them. You know, if it's anything like chain pickerel, you don't usually want to go into
the weeds.
In the weeds with your scuba gear. So I don't even know if it's workable. Do they do it in other states with that kind of spearfishing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't put that much into it. I just thought it was a good idea to get them out. My big concern with Sebago is that they get up through the river.
Yeah.
If they get up through the Crooked River, there's a whole another fishery up there, and that's where all the salmon spawn for Sebago. And it could be devastation if they get up there.
Yeah, in fact, Senator Paul Davis of Sangerville and I have had many discussions about my pike getting out of Pushaw Lake and into the Penobscot River and running up to his lakes and killing off the brook trout, which they would do.
They would absolutely do.
So you know, but you and I are in the same place. We hate pike.
There we go.
From Representative Lester Ordway and spearfishing pike, we go down east, where Representative Robert Alley of Jonesport has a problem. Right now, you can train your bear hunting dogs anywhere in the state during the summer, anywhere, except most of Washington County. You can't do it anywhere south of Route 9. As it happens, Robert Alley sits 2 seats away from me in the chamber. Robert Alley, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. It's a little chaotic here in the House chamber because the speaker just banged the gavel. We're all getting out of here. But I'm finishing up a radio show on some of the more unusual bills we had in the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee. One of those was yours. This was about allowing bear hunters to train their dogs in Washington County.
That is right. And we are the only area that there is, you can't train your dogs. South of Route 9, we have been shut completely off from there to the coast.
Yep.
Which I got a little upset over.
Well, and I think you should have.
And a lot of other people did.
Yeah. I guess the basis of this is hunting dogs have to be trained. Bird dog, if you're training one on hares or bobcats, they're not going to go very far. But when you're training a dog to train on bears, they will often go for miles.
That they do.
Yeah, and so back in 2013, I guess the law was passed in the legislature. I wasn't here. You weren't here. But
no.
Back in 2013, they decided anything south of Route 9 in Washington or Hancock County was going to be off limits because the hunters were basically forced to go into the blueberry barrens and use some of those private roads to go retrieve their dogs. And this was during a period when the blueberry horticultural stuff was going on. So the blueberry company said, look, if this is going to go on, you can't come on our land. And so the legislature just walled off an area that's the size of Delaware. That you have some guides down east who took exception to that.
Yes, they did. Yeah. They really did. And because the people from Route 9 north, right from Hancock right to Calais, they could go hunt and they could take and get their people in there that was going to be hunting for the year and get their guides all set up so that they knew they was going to make their money. But our guides in southern Maine or southern Washington County couldn't do that.
Yeah, basically the entire state can train their dogs except the folks in your area, and that's a big area. Again, I said it's the size of Delaware, so
it is. It's huge.
Yeah,
but they could go down to Old Orchard Beach where there's no rules, and they could, if there was a bear there, they could hunt it.
That's right. So you work with the blueberry industry. The blueberry industry really ultimately wasn't willing to budge.
And no, I was totally surprised because I had a couple that said that they would give us written permission, and there was one fellow that did. He said he would do it, and he did. Yep. He wrote us out a permission slip. But the other fellow said no, and he came in and we talked, and he was against it. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up talking to the Blueberry Commission, and they were against it. So I'd almost wonder why that the ones above Route 9, they have blueberry grounds up there as well. Mm-hmm. But none of them was cut off. It was only us in Washington County and the end of Hancock County.
Well, I bet we see this issue come back again.
I bet you will.
And that'll wrap it up. Once again, that was Representative Robert Alley of Jonesport Beals. He's on the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee with me, and the committee wrestled with over 80 bills this session. Most died, some didn't. But the oddball bills certainly uncovered some interesting issues and produced equally odd results. The Hunter Safety Red for Amish people was actually supported by the Maine Christian Civic League. It passed and was signed by the governor. The game dinner bill died but got the result the sponsor wanted anyway because the policy was indeed clarified by the Maine Warden Service. The moose permit swapping bill got amended in the Senate in a way that gutted the bill, and that led to more controversy. And of course, the spearfishing and blueberry bear hunting bill died quickly. In other words, pretty normal result for some abnormal bills. Bills that in a strange way affect how you can hunt, fish, and recreate in Wild Maine. If for any reason you want to re-listen to this show or share it with others, you can find it online at 929theticket.com. This show and all previous shows are archived under my picture. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Join me next Saturday morning at 9 or Sunday morning at 8 on Sports Radio 929 The Ticket.